Well, TikTok, the destination for short-form mobile videos, will be removed from U.S. app stores from today. This as Washington moves to implement executive orders from President Donald Trump that will also target WeChat, a Chinese social media app. The battle over TikTok is the latest example of the much tougher stance Trump has taken against China in recent months. Critics are questioning why the American president is targeting an app such as TikTok that is largely used by teenagers. But experts say the data the app gathers on its users threatens U.S. security. Well, to talk to us more on the story, I'm joined from Johannesburg by John Stremlau, Wits Professor of International Relations, and Jan Vermeulen, my broadband editor at large, who is joining us from Cape Town. A very good morning to you both, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, let me start with Mr. Stremlau. What are your thoughts on this executive order by U.S. President Donald Trump to actually stop the use of TikTok as well as WeChat from today?
Well, this is a peculiarly American-Chinese problem. I'm not sure it's going to impact very much on us down here, but in the immediate, it's also bound up in election politics because, as you suggest, Donald Trump is trying to appear tough with China at a time when his other policies are a bit of a mess. And so he has taken this as the latest step. And the TikTok is a little different than WeChat, and we might talk about that in a moment.
Oh, well, do you want to explain to us then the differences in terms of WeChat and TikTok? I mean, TikTok does mainly focus on videos, and WeChat is more of a social media platform. But in terms of maybe perhaps the security risk, as Mr. Trump puts it, that this app might pose, are there any differences between the two?
There are very real differences between the two for the people who use them and the scale of which they operate. And we have a real particular interest down here, of course, in WeChat, because WeChat is owned by Tencent, and Naspers down in Cape Town has a very large position and ownership in Tencent. So these will resonate down here. But on the two platforms, the TikTok, as you say, is a video platform. Already, the U.S. government and military have banned the use of it. So it's a bit of a false issue with regard to security. Now, what Donald Trump is bragging about is that he's about to close a deal that would allow for a third of TikTok to be owned by an American company, Oracle, which happens to be a big supporter of his, by the way, and contributor up in Boston. And they would take care of the loading up of apps from TikTok within the United States. Now, Tencent is much bigger and more complex because Tencent does an all-purpose app. It's very important for the Chinese to accumulate information and data about Chinese, and it's very important for Chinese abroad to link up to WeChat for reasons of finance, for reasons of family connections, for reasons of professional interest. I have a very good former colleague, Chinese American, and he has over 4,000 followers on his WeChat page, and he also participates in some 50 groups of 500 to down to 50 in the size. But it's also a way for him to get his articles out there, and he doesn't worry too much about China mining his data. And I guess we're going to be stuck with people mining our data, whether they're Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook or Google, or whether they're WeChat and TikTok.
Well, let me just bring Mr. Vermeulen in. In terms of the amount of data that's mined, what kind of data then do apps such as TikTok and even WeChat collect from their users? And do you think it really does pose as much a security threat, especially considering what Mr. Stremlau was talking about, saying that apps like Facebook as well as Twitter are all collecting our data anyway. So how different is TikTok in terms of data collection?
At the surface level, not that different at all, but the question about whether that presents a security threat is an interesting one, because Facebook presents a security threat to the United States, as has been demonstrated by the accusations of Russian involvement in the 2016 national elections there, or the Russians placing misinformation and so on Facebook to try and manipulate the U.S. voter base. And so the security threat angle there is that TikTok represents no more of a security threat than Facebook or Twitter might. And so the kind of personal information it gathers is largely the same. How it frames that information will be interesting, because Facebook, for example, is able to determine your political leanings one way or the other based on your interactions on the platform and who you're friends with. And TikTok will gather much the same information, but how it then processes that information to determine, a profile for you, so that it can determine what kind of content and ads to serve at you, that's unclear. And the real open question for the Trump administration is just how closely ByteDance and TikTok work with the Chinese Communist Party, and because that's an accusation that they're making, is that the data that is farmed on TikTok is given to the Chinese government, and that the Chinese government exerts some kind of control over the app. But certainly, from where we're sitting, the app does no more than Facebook and Twitter do, and represents exactly the same kind of security threat, which is to say it's not insignificant. It might very well be, and that it's going to be interesting to see how these social media apps play into sort of, modern warfare between these powerful nation states.
And how much more of a role do you think that we'll see tech and in these kinds of social media apps actually playing in politics? Because you've mentioned that Facebook, for example, can determine your political affiliation, and perhaps even TikTok is able to gather similar trends.
Right. So here's an interesting thing that happened on TikTok, and might be a reason that the Trump administration is so interested in it, is that a bunch of minors, people who cannot vote in the United States, organized themselves using TikTok to sit in, effectively, to buy tickets to Trump rallies, and then not pitch. So not buy tickets, but get tickets, because I believe the tickets were free. And so these rallies would then sit empty, because these underage minors who cannot vote are organizing themselves politically on the platform. And so from that angle to the information farming angle, these social media platforms are incredibly important. But it's also not the only thing, the only consideration here, because another thing is that this is also a purely economic thing. Facebook and Twitter are not allowed to, and Google's services are not allowed to operate in China at all. And so from a US perspective, I think it's quite fair to say, hang on a second, we are not allowed unfettered access to the Chinese market. Why should Chinese apps like WeChat, TikTok, and everything else be allowed unfettered access to our market? That's not fair. And so to have a more equitable arrangement, perhaps this is the way to do it, is to force the apps off the air effectively in the United States to get the Chinese government to come to the table.
A bit of a tit for tat there. Now, Professor Stremler, let me bring you in here. It seems to be a very important election year for Donald Trump. And just considering some of the thoughts regarding how some youth who aren't even voter age were able to use TikTok to disturb some of his rallies, do you think that banning these apps, or the use of these apps rather, can put Trump at a bit of a front foot when it comes to the election race?
You're raising a very important point that should resonate down here as well, and Jana alluded to it earlier, which is the use of these platforms for disinformation, and the algorithms that they operate with tend to bias extreme views, because that gets more eye views. And given the enormous flow of information that we're confronted with, Bill Bird at the Media Monitoring Africa estimates that 8 million videos to Facebook are loaded every day. Who has the time to watch these? Or 300 hours uploaded to YouTube every hour. Who has the time to look at these? And so the biases are very real, and they're manipulated by the algorithms and by politicians or governments or corporates that are looking for maximum profit. Now, Donald Trump has exploited this. He lies constantly, and he is a Twitter user, as you all know, with abandon. Bob Mabena, the late Bob Mabena, called him Tweety Gonzalez. And he has disseminated a lot of false information through the body politic. That's what this election is all about. But this is coming to the South African democracy as well. We're having a very serious conversation here this morning, which is the responsibility of responsible media. how do we deal with social media when so much of this information is loaded by vested interests, whether they're profiteers or whether they're governments, and they're trying to manipulate us, and we're so inundated with this information that we can't filter it. So therefore, the responsibility of stations like Newzroom Afrika becomes all the greater.
And just let me just bring in Mr. Vermeulen then, on your thoughts. Should South Africa be taking a page out of Donald Trump's book in terms of trying to restrict the way that social media platforms and different apps are utilized in South Africa? I mean, bringing this home.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's big open questions, regarding political advertisements and so on, and how the platforms are used to spread political and disinformation, political information and disinformation in around the world. And perhaps there's an argument there that we need some form of regulation in South Africa regarding the kinds of ads that are allowed to be placed on these platforms. And for example, even if it's not political discourse, Google's ad platform, is being used in South Africa to advertise products that are scams. Using the faces of famous people, like Pravin Gordhan and even our president Cyril Ramaphosa. And so there's certainly room there for the South African government to say, hang on, we're not going to allow these platforms to be used in this way to minimize how easily an outside entity, whether it's another nation state or an opposing party, can use these platforms to spread this information.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, gentlemen, and sharing your insights into this topic. That was from Johannesburg, Professor John Stremlau, who is a Vice Professor of International Relations, as well as Jan Vermeulen from Cape Town, the My Broadband Editor at Large.